Picture this. You're a coiled spring made of iron and flesh. For 4 hours, you've been nothing but a target. 30,000 screaming enemies swarm around you, burying your shield in arrows. You're bleeding. Your brothers are dying. Every fiber screams to break rank and kill, but you don't move. You're frozen by one command from the most terrifying king in Christendom. Then the tension snaps. 2 knights break formation, and St. George rips through the air. In seconds, you go from statue to missile. 4,000 tons of armored cavalry slam into the enemy. What happens next isn't a battle, it's an erasure. In just 17 minutes, an invincible army is shattered. This is the Battle of Arsuf, where discipline defeated numbers, and Richard the Lionheart proved that patience is the deadliest weapon of all. To understand those 17 minutes, we must strip away the myths. This was a collision between 2 alien military systems. Richard the Lionheart had turned his army into a machine, a moving fortress with heavy infantry on the outside, shielding precious cavalry inside. It absorbed punishment until the enemy got too close. Saladin, master of the East, took the bait. He threw his entire army at this column, convinced he could crack it before the hammer fell. He was wrong. The road to Arsuf was a hallway of death. The Crusader column stretched for miles, flanked by the sea on one side and a forest filled with 30,000 killers on the other. Saladin unleashed waves of mounted archers and Bedouin skirmishers. They rode within yards, firing arrows point-blank into the knight's armor. The sound was deafening: drums, cymbals, war horns, arrows clattering on shields. Psychological torture designed to break minds before bodies. But Richard's discipline was superhuman. He rode the line constantly, shouting orders to hold, to wait, to keep marching. He knew Saladin wanted them to charge early so they'd scatter in the desert and be picked off one by one. So they walked through the arrow storm. Men marched with arrows sticking out of their armor like porcupines, ignoring pain, ignoring insults. A walking anvil, waiting for the hammer. Richard's formation on September 7th was human engineering. He divided his army into 12 squadrons, Knights Templar at the front, heavy cavalry in the center protecting the king, and Knights Hospitaller at the rear, the position of maximum danger. But the genius was the shield covering them. Richard wrapped his cavalry in a thick blanket of infantry. On the left flank, a solid wall of foot soldiers, front rank kneeling with spears, second rank standing with crossbows. Inside this shell, knights rode in safety, matching the grinding pace. Richard went further. To combat fatigue from walking in chain mail under the Middle Eastern sun, he implemented rotation. Half the infantry fought on the outer edge while the other half rested near the sea. Every few hours, they swapped. This simple trick maintained discipline that terrified Saladin. They just wouldn't stop. By the gardens of Arsuf, harassment turned to provocation. Bedouin skirmishers raced up, howling insults, exposing their backsides, begging the Christians to break formation. For medieval knights, honor was everything. To be insulted without responding was soul-crushing. But Richard's orders were ironclad. No one charges until the trumpet sounds. Imagine being a crossbowman on the outer line. You're walking backwards, loading your weapon while arrows whiz past. You're thirsty, eyes stinging with sweat. The only thing keeping you alive is the shield of the man next to you. If he breaks, you die. If you break, the horses die. If the horses die, the crusade ends. This was the march of death, a pressure cooker to see who would crack first. At mid-morning, the forest of Arsuf erupted. 30,000 men poured out, Bedouin lancers, Nubian infantry with iron clubs, deadly Turkish mounted archers. But the first thing that hit wasn't steel. It was sound. Thousands of cymbals clashed, drums thundered, brass trumpets screamed. Chroniclers say the noise was so loud you couldn't have heard God's own thunder. It drowned out Richard's orders, isolating every soldier in a bubble of confusion. Then came the arrows. The sky darkened, not figuratively, but literally. The density of missiles cast a shadow over the column. But Saladin's target wasn't the men, it was the horses. Without horses, knights were just slow men in metal cans. The pressure on the rear guard became unbearable. The Hospitallers walked backward into a buzzsaw, stepping over fallen mounts, shielding faces from arrows, fighting off Sudanese infantry, trying to hamstring remaining horses. Garner de Nablus, Grand Master of the Hospitallers, rode forward to Richard. "Sire, we cannot hold. We must charge." Richard's reply: "Wait." He needed Saladin's entire army fully committed, so close they couldn't escape the counterpunch. This was the ultimate test. Richard asked his men to commit suicide by inaction, gambling that their rage wouldn't snap before he released it. Garner sent another messenger. "Sire, we're being slaughtered like cattle." Again, wait. But the Marshal of the Hospitallers and Baldwin de Caron simply couldn't take it anymore. Without orders, they wheeled their horses around, cleared the shield wall, and screamed St. George. The spark hit the powder keg. Instantly, the entire Hospitaller squadron followed. Then the French, then the Flemish. A chain reaction rippling up the line. The moving fortress was dismantling itself and turning into a tidal wave. Richard heard the roar. For a split second, disaster loomed. The charge was premature, the army attacking in pieces. But this is where Richard earned his legend. He didn't try to stop the tide. He rode it. He shouted to his trumpeters to sound general attack. The transformation was terrifying. One moment, a sluggish column. The next, infantry ranks split like curtains. Through the gaps poured thousands of armored knights. Lances lowered, shields locked, accelerating. For the Saracens crowding the Christians, the world turned upside down. They had zero reaction time. You cannot accelerate a light horse fast enough to escape a heavy charger already at gallop. A fully armored knight on a destrier weighed nearly 1,500 pounds. Moving at 25 miles per hour, that's not a soldier, it's a projectile. Multiply that by 4,000. The front ranks of Saladin's army didn't just die, they were atomized. The impact force was equivalent to being hit by a small truck. Dust became the third player. Visibility dropped to zero. Men fought by sound and silhouette. But Crusaders didn't need to aim, they just rode forward. The wall of steel acted like a snowplow, crushing everything in its path. In less than 17 minutes, the confident horde of 30,000 was reduced to scattered fugitives. The invincible army hadn't just been beaten, it had been run over. But here's where Richard separated himself from every other commander. Right in the middle of blood-fueled chaos, he hit the brakes. He forced his knights to stop, turn around, and reform lines. Imagine the willpower required. But they obeyed. Just in time. Saladin rallied his personal guard for a counterattack, but instead of finding a scattered mob, they ran face-first into a reformed wall of steel. Richard led a second charge, then a third. Charge, destroy, halt, reform. Controlled demolition. Saladin's biographer wrote that Richard was unparalleled, moving across the battlefield like a force of nature. By evening, the field was carpeted with bodies. 32 of Saladin's top emirs were dead. The myth of the Saracen swarm was shattered. Back in Saladin's camp, the mood was funereal. He sat in his tent, refusing to eat, tears streaming down his face. His emirs spoke of the Iron Wall. They said the Frankish knights were not men, but walls of iron that could not be broken. Saladin realized he could not defeat European heavy cavalry head-on. He abandoned plans to defend the coast and ordered the dismantling of Ascalon's fortifications. The 17-minute massacre taught him that Richard was not just another barbarian king. He was a lethal intellect wrapped in steel. Saladin would never again dare to meet Richard in open field. The lion had roared, and the fox had learned to run. In the end, Arsuf wasn't decided by sharper swords or faster horses. It was decided by who could hold their breath the longest. For hours, Richard forced his men to deny basic human instincts, binding them into a machine that functioned on a single brain, his own. Saladin was a genius, but at Arsuf, he was impatient. He mistook Richard's caution for fear and paid with the flower of his army. While Richard never retook Jerusalem, Arsuf saved the Third Crusade from disaster. It bought the Christian kingdom another 100 years in the Holy Land. More importantly, it proved that numbers mean nothing without discipline. It showed that an army of lions led by a sheep will always lose to an army of sheep led by a lion. But at Arsuf, the Crusaders had the terrifying advantage of being an army of lions led by a lion. When you hear Richard the Lionheart, don't just picture a brave knight charging into glory. Picture the man who walked through hell for hours, holding back the tide of rage until the clock struck the perfect second. Picture the discipline behind the fury. That is the true face of victory. If you found this deep dive fascinating, smash that subscribe button. Leave a comment. Do you think Richard should have marched on Jerusalem after this victory, or was he right to be cautious? Thanks for watching.